Good evening and welcome everyone. It's now 7 p.m. and I'd like to start the meeting of the Standards and Audit Committee on 19th of July 2023. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded onto the Council's website. Item 1, apologies for absence. Ryan, do we have any apologies of absence?
No apologies.
Thank you very much. Item 2, the minutes. I move that the minutes of the Standards and Audit Committee held on the 23rd of February 2023 be approved as a correct record. Anyone to second that? Councillor Lydiard?
Yeah, I'll second that.
I note there was 5 members present at that meeting that are here tonight, so does any member have any comments to make on the minutes? Those minutes are approved. Thank you. Item 3, urgent items of business. I have agreed for 2 internal audit reports to be heard tonight as items of urgent business, and they were scheduled on the work programme to be heard for this meeting. The first is the Chief Internal Auditor's Annual Report, year ended 31st of March 2023, including his summarised report for year ended 31st of March 2022, and can be found as a loose report on your papers. For Gary Clifford to introduce this report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So it's a requirement under the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards that I provide the Section 151 officer and the Council with an annual opinion on the adequacy of governance, risk management and internal control arrangements. In doing this, I can only provide reasonable assurance, as we will never be able to cover all of the areas of the Council's operations. This opinion also forms a key part of the assurance framework which informs the annual governance statement. Within the exec summary, pages 1 and 2, I've reflected the fact that of the covering report, the context against which my opinion has been issued, so the BVI report and the intervention have been taken into account as part of my opinion as well. On page 12 of the covering report, in the second to last paragraph, I explain why the report is being presented in 2 parts. The first being the summary report to cover off 21-22 opinion, which was delayed due to staff leave and then the intervention process coming into play, and the second relating to the 2022-23 opinion, which was significantly impacted by resources in the intervention process. If I can now move you to page 1 of the actual report. Page 1 and page 2. On page 1, paragraph 3 provides some background into why the opinion has to be provided and what it impacts on, such as the annual governance statement, which has to be signed off by both the Chief Executive and the Leader of the Council. It then details what the annual governance statement sets out. Page 2 sets out the context in more detail and includes the 5 key themes of the improvement and recovery plan. Internal audit forms one of the work streams within the governance and scrutiny work stream. It's just worth mentioning at this point that the members' knowledge and skills questionnaire that was sent out on the 8th of June and chased up on the 20th of June is a key part of us working more closely with you and developing an understanding for you of both our and your roles and responsibilities. To date, I've received 4 of the questionnaires back, and I've given a hard copy tonight, and I've got additional copies if required. But if I contact those who have not responded tomorrow, could I encourage them to complete the questionnaire and return it to me by next week, if that's possible? I can then analyse the results and work with the Chair to develop a programme of training and knowledge building for the committee. The last paragraph on page 2 reflects that the issues identified as part of the intervention and BVI report were happening prior to the period being reported on, and I have taken them into account and come into my opinion. So on page 3 of the actual report, that details the summarised report for 21-22. It picks up on the challenges being faced by both the service and the council at that time. Page 4 and 5 provides the actual opinion split between governance, risk management and internal control. So I'll go through those one at a time. In terms of governance, it's reflected in here that the then Corporate Director of Resource and Place Delivery was reporting on the financial management issues around the investments to the committee, but always responded positively, and that he was happy with how the council had invested in renewable energy. The issues around major projects had already been highlighted in the previous year and were ongoing, so bearing those in mind and the outcomes of the intervention and the best value report, I've provided a red no assurance opinion on governance. In respect to risk management, whilst there was regular reporting to the Corporate Risk and Opportunity Register to the committee, it was clear that the Council's risk management arrangements were not progressing due to the lack of resources. Whilst the process appeared to be robust at the corporate level, there was still more to do at the service operational level. Bearing that in mind, again, I've done the outcomes of the intervention and best value report. I've provided a red no assurance opinion on risk management. And in terms of internal control, 11 reports were issued during the year, of which 10 were positive and 1 was negative. All were reported to the Standards and Audit Committee. We did have an audit on financial sustainability in the plan, but that was deferred by the service due to issues arising from the final accounts process. This change to the plan was reported back to the committee at its meeting of the 25th of November 21. There continue to be issues around the major projects, as highlighted in the governance section above. So bearing those issues in mind, again, I've given a red no assurance opinion on internal control. Page 6, the overall opinion for 2022-23. In the first paragraph, I state that I could not provide an opinion on the adequacy and effectiveness of governance and risk management and internal control arrangements. I then detailed the factors that led to this decision and include the appointment of Essex County Council as commissioners, the appointment of Essex County Council as best value inspectors, the council's issuing of a Section 114 notice through the Section 1451 officer, the loss of the last 2 members of the team and the continued vacancies, retraining of new staff who were eventually employed in September 22, and additional work that we had to carry out around the COVID-related grants. And then at the bottom of page 6, I detailed actions that I'll be taking to reduce the likelihood of similar limitations in future in respect of the service we provide. Some of these actions have already started, and I'll update the committee as part of my progress reports during the year. And then on page 8, we reflect there that no follow-up work was undertaken due to the resourcing issues, and also highlight works we had to do around grant expenditure and the Troubled Families Programme, which we have to carry out as part of the terms of the payments we receive. It also confirms we didn't undertake any work where we had a conflict of interest. And page 9 confirms we're non-compliant with the public sector internal audit standards, as we have not undertaken a self-assessment, and I haven't been able to provide an opinion around governance, risk management, internal control this year, which is another reason that we're not compliant. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Gary, for your report. Bear in mind, members of the committee, that we've been asked to consider a recommendation that the Standards Audit Committee considers and comments on the Chief Internal Auditor's annual report. Any members of the committee like to ask any questions? Councillor Weber.
Thank you. Looking at page 6, where you talk about the fact that vacancies were filled in September 2022, do you feel that you now have a strong enough and large enough team to actually carry this out in the way it's needed?
Thank you, Councillor. We did recruit 2 internal auditors in September of that year. We've also now recruited a senior internal auditor. We're still carrying 1 vacant post, but we're having discussions with Mazars on Friday about them providing with us us with additional support, which links into that Apex framework, which I'll give you a bit more details on in the next report.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members? Yes, please, go ahead. If you could introduce yourself first, please.
Last question. Bottom of page 6, you reference the fact that senior roles are difficult to recruit into. Being that there's alternative solutions would be explored, is that the Mazar one you're referring to?
That is one of the alternative solutions that we're looking at, but we're also looking at potentially whether we could do some sort of shared service with another local authority.
Thank you.
Thank you. You might have to turn off your microphone. Thank you. Just following on from that, are we actually using that system already with Croydon, or is it something that's coming forward?
We've been signed up to the contract for a few years. We haven't tended to use them in the past because of the pandemic, so they weren't undertaking any work. Mazars weren't coming out to do any work. So it's something that we've picked up that we had used in the past, but we're re-picking it up now and starting to use it again.
Thank you for that. It would just be interesting to hear how Croydon, how it's working for them, just to sort of we can reflect on that for Thurrock and see how well it could work here. Any other members with comment? Councillor Collins.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. Can I just clarify that we are using Mazars now, please?
No, we have a meeting with them and they have resources set aside for us to start using them from September.
Okay, because we were talking about this in the last meeting. What's the reason for the delay, please?
It's Mazars. It's Mazars that it's just them resourcing it for us. So we had the discussion prior to the last meeting, but I think even at that meeting I said that it would be September before they started undertaking the work.
Has this negatively impacted our internal auditing up to now, please, for not having them on board?
No, because with the plan that I'll be discussing next, we hadn't actually built the Mazars work into our plan. So the plan was based on the resources that we had.
Okay, so can you tell me when you expect to actually deploy Mazars on this, please?
That'll be from September.
September, thank you.
Chair, may I? A meeting is taking place, Councillor, on Friday with Mazars. I'll be in attendance. If I could bring that arrangement forward, I will push that on Friday to try and get them in sooner to help to start to undertake the work that's required in our internal audit plan. And I will pick up the point about how they work with Croydon and if they work with any others and what good lessons we can pick up going forward, and I'm happy to bring that back to committee too.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. Just wanted to go onto the public sector internal audit standards. Lovely acronym there. What sort of risks are we susceptible to by not having this renewed in the correct time?
There are no sort of regulatory risks, but the specific risk is that external audit will not be able to place much reliance on our work as they previously would, so they may have to do more work, so there may be an additional cost.
And perhaps a longer timeline to complete the results as well? That's a question.
Potentially.
Thank you for that. I've been considering sort of where we're going from almost a standing start. We sort of want to make progress on this as quickly as possible and get these things in place. Any other member? Yes, please. You can introduce yourself first, please.
Hi, Justin Nijar. Just a quick question on the new internal audit software. Has that improved tracking and documentation, or will it speed up future internal controls testing?
It will, but because I've got such new staff, they're still getting the training or learning to use the system. So it will in the long term. In the short term, it's probably taking a little bit longer, just while they're training up on the system.
And I assume the auditors could place more reliance because the system is being used and all the documentation will be logged.
Yeah, all the documentation is logged on the system, along with all the working papers and all the testing.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from members before we go to the recommendation? The recommendation as written that the Standards and Audit Committee considers and comments on the Chief Internal Auditor's Report Annual Report, year ended 31st of March 2023, included summarised report for year ended 31st of March 2022. Show we in agreement, please. All agree? Any to the contrary? That's unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to the next urgent item of business. Again, it's loose papers. It's an internal audit strategy and 6-month plan 2023/2024. Over to you again, Gary, to present this report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our internal audit strategy and 6-month plan for 2023/24. Again, within the executive summary of the covering report, we're providing some context against the circumstances in which the plan has been developed. And these have already had an impact on the plan and led to changes to the original plan. Paragraph 3 of the report recognises that having a 6-month plan gives us that additional flexibility to respond to the changing priorities and risks facing the council. On the second page, 1.1, we're asking the committee to receive and agree the plan and acknowledge it's likely to change significantly due to the intervention of the BV report. Paragraph 2.1 of the cover report details who the original plan was discussed with as part of the audit needs assessment undertaken in November and December. And paragraph 2.2 provides some examples of other areas, both internal and external, which we also use to inform the plan, such as the corporate risk register, reports from external inspection agencies, that sort of thing. On the third page, 2.4 highlights that the plan is fluid and dynamic, but all changes will be discussed and agreed with the Chair of the Standards and Audit Committee and reported to all members of the committee at the next meeting. If I can take you to the actual report, page 3 and 4 of the report provides a definition of internal audit at 1.1 from the Institute of Internal Auditors, and recognise at 1.2 factors influencing internal audit coverage, and recognises at 1.2 that the Council's vision and priorities are the starting point in developing the strategy. At the top of page 5, already been covered, the plan's been shared with members of the senior leadership team and portfolio holder for transformational change communications and governance. Comments made by them have been considered and taken on board. This is the bit for that will interest Councillor Tandy. Whilst we still have vacant posts, alternative ways to manage the resource issue are being looked at, and we're utilising the Apex framework contract with Croydon Council. So the Apex framework contract, Croydon Council went out to a number of internal audit organisations and firms, most of them medium-sized, to carry out a contract process for the supply of internal audit and counter-fraud staff to assist local authorities. Mazars won that contract and were approved as the contractor under the framework. It's a call-off contract, so if we don't use them, we don't pay anything to them. So we only pay for what we use for, and there are fixed rates depending on what sort of audit staff that we're using. So, just as an example, well, no, I won't say any figures, but an IT auditor is substantially more expensive than somebody who's an internal auditor doing an internal audit. So there's different rates for different people, and as he said, we have the meeting with them on Friday to look at what they can provide to us in terms of a service. Initially, we were going to use them for just IT audit work and some internal audit work, but there is the potential to explore whether they can do more for us. We'll have that discussion with them Friday. So does that sort of help clarify? On the top of page 6, the most significant key areas that have impacted on the plan are clearly the intervention and the best value inspection report, and these will continue to have an impact moving forward. And the rest of page 6 sets out the other areas where the service spends time, so on the grants and that sort of thing. Page 7 includes the declaration of the independent nature of the service, the other assurance providers we work with to reduce duplication, and reiterates that we cannot cover all the risks in the processes. 2.3 sets out the standards, what the standards and audit committee should consider in agreeing the plan. On page 8, Appendix A, that details some of the issues that may affect the council, some of which are reflected in the plan. A number of these are shown as known and emerging as their ongoing risks. So, for example, cybersecurity, where the risk issues are known, but as hackers develop their skills, cyber attacks still happen. So it continues to be an ongoing risk. Also, it should be noted that some of the external factors that can result in internal issues arising. So, for example, the cost of living rise, which is an external factor, will almost certainly have an impact on homelessness, which is an internal factor. Pages 9 to 12, Appendix B, sets out the 6-month plan. In the first column, auditable area, we've linked the reviews back to specific risks to the council. So they may result from the issuing of the Section 114 notice, the BBI report, the improvement and recovery plan, or risks highlighted on the corporate risk register. And following the discussion earlier, we've also added in business continuity and disaster recovery, so that will be shown on the next plan. But there was some IT audit work in there, and that's highlighted on page 11, where we did have cybersecurity as an internal audit. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Gary, for your report. Just to go over the recommendation again to set the scene. The recommendation for us is to receive and agree the Internal Audit Services 6-month Internal Audit Plan 2020.
Can I just ask a question, please?
Yes.
Thanks. Just want to draw your attention to page 10 at top, disinvestments, including asset disposals. And it says, as a result of Council's financial position, it is reviewing the assets and investments to determine those that can be disposed of to support its improvement in the recovery. I won't go through the whole lot. We've got the audio auction, and it's got proposed start in the last column, Q2. I was under the impression that this should have all been ongoing already. Is this because we didn't have enough people in internal audit, please?
Well, it is ongoing already, and Jonathan will have more knowledge of that than I am. But we're looking at the process, but the actual process has started. So our check is to provide the members of the Standards and Audit Committee with assurance that the process that's being followed is a robust process.
We discussed this earlier in February, and was under the impression it was being sorted out there and then.
Councillor, can I just add? So the actual divestment of investments is underway. What Gary's process is the audit of the process that follows subsequently. So they're two separate aspects. So the actual process is happening, but the audit, to assure you as members that that was conducted appropriately, is obviously has to wait until that's happened to assess how it was enacted. And just to assure you, I mean, as you know, and the most public process that currently is running to date is the sale of the solar assets, so run by the administrators. They issue public statements themselves, and that process is just concluding phase 1, and phase 2 will follow with a ultimate goal to sell the assets by the end of November. So that's the actual reality of kind of where we are with sales of investments. There's other investments that are in process as well, and further reports will be brought through to Cabinet in September, and the investment panel also on an ongoing basis. So you will get lots of further information on that as we go through the rest of the year. Just coming back though, Gary's process as internal auditor is to assess how that has happened, and also provide assurance to members on that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Apologies, Councillor Connor. I wasn't moving straight to the recommendation. I was just reading through the recommendation to set the scene so we make sure the questions and comments are relevant.
I didn't want to lose my chance.
No, I didn't want to. I would let you continue, so that's fine. So just to acknowledge that it's likely to change significantly as a result of the work being undertaken as part of the BVI and intervention process. Based on that, does any member comment or question? Councillor Rigby.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you for your report. Just on the finance with the investments, you say here that you're going to be doing proper risk assessments and challenges going forward. How is that going to be on like set models, or how are you actually going to do that and assess your risk management? Oh, sorry, on page 10 as well, under finance for investments. So going forward, for your sort of risk assessments with internal audit, you've said that you will be doing proper risk assessments. I'm just wondering how that is going to be, whether you're going to follow a model or method, or what other councils are doing, or how are you actually going to do that risk assessment?
Specifically around the divestments and asset disposals.
Yes. So going forward, you comment that you're going to be doing proper risk assessments for the investments that the council is going to be making. But I'm just wondering how you're actually going to do that. Whether you're following fixed models or following what other councils are doing, or methods, or you've got external advice on that, or how that actually is going to occur in practice.
Right, I understand. Right, yeah, we would look at best practice and pick up on best practice in terms of how other councils look at their asset disposals. We don't have a specific modelling risk assessment process that we can use, but we would that would be around us developing it as we understand more about the business. And how divestments and asset disposals work. So it would be done in conjunction with the service, and just having discussions with senior management in terms of any concerns that they may have, and picking up, like I say, on best practice, and in discussion with our colleagues from external audit as well. To see if there's any issues they particularly have where they feel there's still significant risks that we need to pick up on.
Councillor, could I add to that? So Gary will assess the process we've gone through. So, for example, prior to the Toucan administration, we sought a decision from the leader on behalf of Cabinet with scrutiny from the chair of the Overall Scrutiny Committee. So that was the governance around going and supporting an administration process for Toucan. In terms of the advice they received to make that decision, we used our council advisors, and in terms of the ongoing process, there's ourselves, our advisors, our legal colleagues who support ongoing calls with the administrators, assessment of information, updates. So today, for example, we had an update from the administrator, We all attend those calls and go through that process. There's an ongoing discussion ultimately about offers and bids, and ultimately it will all come back through with any appropriate decisions back to you as members, which will be signed off in the appropriate forums. So I think that description is describing broadly what the process I described will then be assessed by Gary's team to make sure we took the appropriate steps, sought best value in the sale, and followed those governance processes so you as members came in at the right moments to make the key decisions with the best advice available. I think broadly that's how I see it operating. Obviously Gary's got to come and assess that subsequently, and as we go through that process we're very mindful of the requirements, particularly on governance and best value in light of everything that we've had to take on board through the BVI report.
Councillor Raper.
Thank you. Can I just go back to something you said about sale of assets and things being fed back to members? Does that mean they'll be fed back to this committee? Does it mean it will only go to Cabinet? Can you sort of expand on that, please?
So it will depend. There'll be decision points where we may have to take urgent decisions. It will be through the appropriate governance route. All of the reporting on process will come back through Cabinet, but will also go through Corporate ONS, for example, prior to that. And as we go through that process, obviously we will have had some confidential information. We will then release that information at the appropriate moments where we can. And when I'm referencing that, particularly in respect of any legal cases attached to the investment process. So I think we're working our way through what we can bring to which forum when. We will certainly have to, for example, bring some pink papers through to Cabinet in September because we've got these ongoing actions that we need to make sure run their course appropriately. And at relevant points, we will report both to you as members and report publicly.
Thank you. It's just anecdotally in the past, certain things seem to hit roadblocks and perhaps the information doesn't come to everyone. So that's quite reassuring to hear that you're going to find ways to make sure, when appropriate, we get the information. Thank you.
Councillor Tandy.
Yeah, this question's to Gary. Obviously, pre-BVI report and Essex coming on board, what do you see as the biggest change from last year to this year in your open mind?
The biggest change for me has been the issue we've had around resources, really. If you talk about in terms of the council, the whole council, the biggest change I've seen is I suppose it forms out of the BVI and the Best Value report, but the interaction between officers and members and the way that has changed and improved, and the supply of information between them. That's been the biggest change, I think, the culture.
I think this it's really good to see this report. I think I can see why it's 6 months, because it needs enough time to get a bit of traction, but it also needs to be short term and nimble enough, because this committee's going to meet once more, and then the next time it meets will be the end of that 6 months. So it's only like not very far away in terms of our meetings, which we might look at maybe later, look at terms of reference, etc. But the other thing I picked up on was the business continuity and disaster recovery. And you don't have to name, I don't need a name, but I just wanted to know, is there a named officer that's heading that up? Because we've had a flooding of the old council offices, and I know officers could continue to a degree, but I felt personally as members we didn't quite get any sort of alternative, really good disaster recovery plan on what we were to do, because we obviously lost our working spaces at that time as well. So just wondered, is there a named officer that's heading this up?
There is a named officer within the council that heads it up.
I think as a committee it would be good for us to get more information around that side of things. That no one expected a once-in-a-100-year pandemic 5 years ago, and council offices flooding and things burned down. You don't know what's going to happen around the corner, so it's good that we cover with the bases. Any other comments or questions? Just quickly. Yes, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Gary, for your report. In terms of investments, do you now have a sort of a investment ceiling that you adopt throughout the council?
Thank you, Councillor. Broadly, our focus is on divesting of the current investments. We are resetting Treasury strategies, and their key focus is that divestment. We will reset the strategy again then, and we will, in parallel, look at a commercial strategy, but very much our focus at the moment, obviously that the previous strategy was underpinned by borrowing, for example. We certainly are looking to significantly reduce our borrowing because that, as we're currently looking at financial sustainability, debt cost going forward is a key factor and an issue. So broadly, the economic environment wouldn't lead you to a similar form of investment strategy or any equivalent form currently. So it's very much everything, I think, focused over the next 5-year window is about reducing debt, which ultimately is about divestment of investments and wider actions we can take to reduce that broader debt level.
Any other? Councillor Collins?
Just an answer for you, or a part of an answer to your flood risk concern. In the minutes of our last meeting, on page 7, it says Councillor Collins noted flood risk was not mentioned in Appendix 1, and the answer was the corporate risk and insurance manager clarified the report concerned strategic corporate items. At department level, there will be a risk around flooding, but the responsibility sits with the emergency planning team. So all we've got to do is find out who's in charge of the emergency planning team. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other member have any comment or question regarding this item? I understand that this plan is going to be fast moving, and it mentions working with the chair. And I'd like to say I'm going to make sure that any information I feed back to the rest of the committee and co-opted members, so we can all see the fast moving picture that's going to happen, and in that way there's not going to be any surprises when we look at how this plan's getting on in 6 months. Thank you very much. So just to go to the recommendation. Recommendations to receive and agree the Internal Audit Service's 6-month Internal Audit Plan 23-24 and acknowledge it is likely to change significantly as a result of the work being undertaken as part of the BVI and intervention processes. All those agree?
Yep.
To the contrary? I say unanimous agree. Thank you. Going back now to the main agenda, item 4, declarations of interest. Does anyone wish to declare a declaration of interest? There's no all around the room. Thank you. Item 5, terms of reference. This report can be found on pages 15 to 18 of the agenda. Can I ask Ryan Whiteley to present this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. So on page 15 of the agenda is the terms of reference for this committee, as it is set out in the Constitution. Within the terms of reference, there is important information relating to this committee, such as the quorum, and it explains what members are constitutionally required to do. This item is for members to note and to comment on.
Thank you very much for that report. Thank you. Members, so this is to note and to comment on, but it's also our terms of reference going forwards. So if there's things in here you think should be in here, then please, if you could put your question forward, or likewise, there are things that shouldn't be in this terms of reference. So perhaps if we can go through it in a little bit of detail and see what questions and debate come from it, and that will open up to the floor to members. Councillor Collins.
Yeah, external auditing. Will there be any changes to the way that's done going forward, especially materiality, please?
I answer initially, and if Rachel. So, do you mean, Councillor Collins, in reference to the current situation we're in specifically, or do you mean more broadly across the sector?
Broadly across the sector.
Well, I think in terms of the broad, obviously auditing is constantly moving, and Rachel's bringing reports here which will update you on any changes to audit process. Obviously, you also see that in terms of the audit strategies that they set and ultimately deliver in terms of the reporting that comes back to the committee. So I think you get a constant update through that. But Rachel, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, essentially the materiality level for the council is one of the judgments that I make when I am planning the audit. So I will take into account all of the risks and all of the information when I set that within a kind of guideline range that is an industry standard. So it does have the opportunity to change, but again, it's dependent on the risk level. But the guidance that we use to set materiality hasn't changed.
May I follow up? It was practiced before, this unpleasantness, that you'd have a materiality, or the external auditor would have a materiality of £1/3 and it would you'd only be taking samples of things that you were looking at. Has any of that changed, please?
No, the audit strategy that we use remains the same. So you have a materiality level, which is an overall materiality level for the financial statements as a whole, and that is what we use to guide our testing. And then for this audit in particular, we have a fully substantive audit process, which, as you said, is based on statistical sampling, and those sampling methods give us assurance over those balances based on the materiality levels that we use. So again, the actual process won't change, but there is flexibility within the numbers.
If nothing has changed, and from the system that was used before everything melted down, how can we be sure it's going to work properly the second time round going forward? What assurances do we have, please?
So the materiality level is what we use to guide the testing that we do. So on your significant balances, those are highly material, so our testing wouldn't change. We would test those levels of balances in the same way because they are significant. So I think the materiality level is around £9 million. So everything in terms of borrowing, investments, all those areas are significantly material. So they would always be tested.
Okay, so did I hear that correctly? Because I'm a bit deaf. The materiality is 9 million now?
Yes.
It was £1/3 now it's 9 million?
No, it's always been around that level, £9 million.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. I'm going to go right back to right at the start of on page 15 at number 2. I'm looking at what we've heard already this evening, and looking at the frequency, at least quarterly. So that does give an option for extra meetings. One of my worries is 6 elected members is the number of. Have we got enough substitutes or members in this committee to actually ensure that we're going to be core if we do need to call extra meetings, as we're working through this 6-month plan that we've just heard, that we might need an extra meeting towards the end of that. So I'm a bit concerned. So just maybe Democratic could advise how potentially we could increase the amount of members on the committee, or at least bring in some more substitutes.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback. So I think ultimately the size of committees are set by full council at every annual council. So if the committee wished to expand its membership at base level, we would have to factor that in and take that for full council to agree. Substitutes are the gift of the political group. So substitutes are allowed to sit or to be appointed to this committee again by full council. So if you feel that there are not enough substitutes at present sitting on this committee, then I would recommend that you go through your group leaders to make a nomination at full council next week, and that will be resolved, and at the next meeting we'll have those substitutes on. Obviously, if you're thinking of expanding the base numbers of the committee, officers could help with benchmarking and suggest how standards and audit committees are undertaken in other councils to give you an idea of what might be an average size.
Thank you. I'm just aware the political calendar is quite chock-a-block, and sometimes it's hard to get extra meetings in and get those numbers around the table to actually hold a meeting. Councillor Lydiard.
Thank you. We're obviously going through a best value process at the present moment. What happens at the end of that best value process? Does it just stop, or should we be looking to the future to say, well, maybe we should have our own sort of fairly low level, best value inspectors as part of an audit team or part of another team somewhere else?
Thank you, Councillor. So, through you, Chair. So the best value inspection report has obviously arrived here in Thurrock, and we have directions. So although that best value inspection report has landed and it's finalised, we have ongoing improvement work we still need to do, but what we still have is a direction on the authority. So other local authorities who have had directions, it's taken them between 3 to 5 years to get that direction lifted so we can get our powers back, because at the moment the powers are with commissioners. So yes, it is good governance and good practice to have peer reviews throughout any local authority's tenure, the electoral cycle. We could introduce more types of inspectoral type of work through the audit system. There are a variety of options we can go through, but one of the aims is to ensure that we achieve the improvement recovery board outcomes and objectives, and that we demonstrate to the commissioners and to the Secretary of State that we have addressed all the concerns that they've raised as well through the directions, because that is a piece of legislation that is on us at the moment. So one of the objectives are, once we have satisfied to commissioners and to the Secretary of State that we have addressed all the issues concerned, the Secretary of State will then need to consider lifting that piece of legislation off us, lifting the directions off us. And that's a process that it doesn't happen overnight. And if you look at other authorities who have had intervention, it has taken a good few years to get to that point, and it's only when directions are lifted you then have all your powers back as I don't want to say normal, but I think you need, as a local authority would have.
So we could still have our own best value once your process has finished, yeah?
Yes, so it would be called, there are other alternatives to exactly same best value inspections. We could have, like I said, a peer review that could achieve very similar things to what a best value inspection report, and we could, and it is good practice within a local authority to have peer reviews in different areas.
Any other member wants to comment on a question regarding the terms of reference? So the recommendation is for us to note the terms of reference and obviously ask some questions as well. Are we all in agreement of that?
Right. Yep.
To the contrary? So again, unanimous agree. Thank you. Item 6 on your agenda is the External Audit Progress Report. We have Rachel Britton with us tonight. Rachel Britton, please present this item.
Thank you, Chair. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rachel Britton. I'm a director at BDO, and I'm the key audit partner who is responsible for the Thurrock engagement. I'll let Ryan introduce himself.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm Ryan Ferguson. I'm my partner at BDO and part of our audit executive. So I'm essentially here as part of our increased oversight and staying close to the public sector audits, and Thurrock in particular.
So it says that it's a verbal update, but I did circulate a timeline paper earlier this week, which I believe you've all got, and I will talk through that. Essentially, we met in February, and I outlined the timeline that we had agreed with officers in terms of delivering the audit. And this report is a more detailed version of that, so you can see exactly what key steps we are planning to undertake at each particular point. Obviously, there are many factors involved in delivering this audit, so this is an outlined timeline, and it will be potentially impacted by any new information the receipt of good quality working papers and supporting evidence, revised risk assessments and consideration of the best value inspection report as well. So as with internal audit, it is going to be a little bit fluid, but this is as we see it currently. So in July, and I appreciate we are on the 19th of July now, but by the end of July we have agreed with officers the working papers that we need to be able to complete our audit procedures. And we have met with them regularly over the last few months to make sure that those working papers are sufficient, cover all the things that we need them to cover, and have all the information that we require in. And Jonathan and his team will be providing those to us in the next week or so. Alongside that, myself and the team are assessing the impacts from the best value inspection report and considering those actions on my risk assessment and whether I need to revise that risk assessment. And part of that consideration would be around materiality and whether I need to change the materiality level, which was initially presented in the audit plan when we started the engagement. So that takes us through July. August to October, we will be undertaking our procedures, doing the detailed testing, liaising with officers and our specialists to make sure that we are completing the relevant procedures. The proposal for September Standards and Audit Committee, although appreciating it is only 6 weeks away, is to bring to you that revised audit plan. So that will include any changes from the initial audit plan that I presented, any changes to materiality and any additional procedures or additional considerations that need to take place as part of that reassessing the risk. Throughout November, we will undertake our finalisation processes and our internal quality review processes. Through probably into December with a view to presenting a completion report here in December, January time, and hopefully being able to give you a very progressed update on the audit, if not a final position. In terms of what is outstanding, there is a section there that goes through the 4 main complex and technical areas that we are working with Jonathan and his team to resolve. And alongside that, as I said, there will be a number of other procedures that we will need to undertake. So it's not just those 4 areas that are outstanding. There are a number of other things that we'll need to consider and update in light of the new information that we have, including the best value inspection report, governance arrangements and those kind of things, and how that impacts on our audit and our procedures. And then to respond to the increased levels of risk, we have a specialist involvement. So just listing out there the nature of those specialists that will be supporting us to be able to challenge the council on their judgments and their estimates, so that we get to a good answer, the right answer. And just finally, just in terms of setting out there our quality processes and what we will be going through to make sure that everything is documented and there is a robust quality audit process that happens. So happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you very much for your report. Thank you for that. Just on the IFRS 9 specialist, could you just go into a bit more detail about that? It sounded quite interesting about how to dig down into what the council says on one thing on paper, and I'm guessing to just cross-reference that.
Yes, so essentially what will happen is the council so IFRS 9 is the standard that you use to account for your investments. The council will do an assessment against that standard and provide us with that assessment. We will use our specialist to review that assessment, and this is already in process. We've already had kind of initial discussions and initial conversations with them to see whether we come to the same conclusion using our expert knowledge.
Okay, thank you for that. And it's very important that you get all of the documentation, data, paperwork that you need. That question is probably more for Jonathan on this one. I know John has come in. We're nearly there at the end of it. Are you 100% sure we're going to get all this over to BDO so they can get on with their part of the audit?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, this is a really complicated area of reassessment of investments, particularly. So there's some other areas on there. The other areas actually are more sector-wide issues that we're also responding to. So some of our colleagues at Essex, for example, are also having to respond to infrastructure asset queries and things like that. On those more, what I would call straightforward ones, yes, they're all being addressed. They're all in progress. They will be with the team. The investment piece, particularly the detail behind solar investments, for example, where we've got a series of bonds that all have to be considered both individually and collectively, is a more complicated piece of work, and we are working through broad approaches, and we kind of filter it down. So we'll share that with Rachel. In principle, this is our starting point. Are you happy with that? And then we'll narrow it down and get more and more detail. So very happy we will work through it methodically and strategically with Rachel and the team. As Rachel noted, there's always some flex in these. This is very complicated. We're aware that will bring risk on the timetable. We're also aware of the level, just from the list of advisors that Rachel's just referred everyone to. There's a number of levels of review to go through. But just to sort of provide some further assurance to members, what we have done in the financial accounts team is support with additional resource. And actually, the person who trained you tonight is now, Peter is a long-standing member of the Audit Commission technical team, and has then been providing technical support to a range of councils, as he noted. He is broadly working with us 2 to 3 days a week now. So we've got his technical advice in that, and very much he's involved in some of the meetings with Rachel and team. So we will definitely work through these issues. When we've worked through these issues, we've then got an allocation piece of work to understand prior year adjustments, not just for the 1920 accounts, but going back into the prior year, prior year figures that are included in those accounts. So you're not going back forever. You're going back to effectively the 1st of April 18, I think it is. I'm just getting my head. 18, 19, 19, 20. Yes, so we'll probably have effectively 3 balance sheets in our 1920 accounts, which will effectively bring us up to speed at different points in time, because our investments were conducted for solar, for example, over broadly a 4 to 5 year period. And we need to adjust the accounts for the level of investment we had at relevant points in time, and also to assess a value for those investments in the context of everything we now know. So that's why it's particularly complicated, because it's not easy to go back in time, it's not easy to get values at points in time, and it's then not easy to assess what the impact of what we know now has had on those values. So, you know, absolutely, we're fully committed to supporting the process, but we need to see where, particularly on those investments, that takes us, and we will obviously report back to the committee on that progress throughout. On the wider issues, I think much more straightforward, Chair, and they will be cleared. And broadly, just to go back in time, apart from the 4 issues mentioned, broadly, we were substantially complete on the rest of the audit. Now, obviously, that part, and this again is another what if, is subject to Rachel's reassessment of materiality and the wider risk environment that the council's facing. And when Rachel brings the plan back, we will all receive clarity on what impact that may have had. So, you know, I just want to just sort of keep it in context. We're at the start of that, what I call the phase 2 journey almost. And as we get more and more information, that clarity on timetable will become clearer. But we are working very hard, and obviously our commissioners want us to clear these issues as soon as possible, to then move on to subsequent years. Although, just coming back to what Peter said on the training right at the start, there are, and Rachel will be aware as well, obviously very aware, there are numerous audits kind of backed up at all councils at the moment. So although our situation is nevertheless unique to some degree, for lots of other reasons, lots of audits are, and the reason to mention that as well is because that can impact on resource levels both at the audit end as well. So there's lots of factors at play. We just need to work through step by step and keep bringing the updates back to you, and we'll give you more clarity as we go on.
Thank you for that. I know the amount of work is vast. It's just I didn't want there's an authority to hold up the process in any way. So it sounds like the basic information at the very least is going to be in a timely manner. Any other members of... Yes, please.
Just a quick question. On the IFRS 9 specialist, is that internal BDO resource by the technical team or external?
Yeah, it's someone in our financial reporting and accounting team, so they're an internal specialist that we use.
And has relevant templates been provided to the council to make sure that they're recording the information that will give BDO assurance?
So we haven't issued them with a template, but what we have done is had numerous discussions about the information that we need, what that looks like, how it needs to be recorded. So I'm confident that we'll get what we have asked for.
Just one more question. Just on the accountability and the timelines, is there a audit request tracker when information is being requested, when it was received, any follow-up questions, close dates? So when we get to the end of October, it's visible on where any potential delays were?
Yes, so we use a system called Inflow, which monitors all of our requests, and that's a system that both my team and Jonathan's team can log on to. Those are our requests are put in there, Jonathan's team respond in there, so it's all tracked. You can see exactly when it was requested, when it was answered.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other comments? This is one for us to note, but if there's any comments or questions, well, Rachel BDO here. Looking around the room. No. Well, thank you very much for bringing your report to us. We're looking forward in September to getting the revised plan. Yeah, thank you very much. And if we can be of any assistance as a committee in the meantime, please let us know. Thank you. You're free to go whenever you like, unless you'd like to stay. And just our recommendation to note and comment. Can we all agree that that's taken place at the home?
Agreed.
Agreed. Unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to item 7, Gifts and Hospitality Report. This report can be found on page 19 of the agenda. Asma Hussain, please can you present your report?
Thank you, Chair. So what Standards and Audit Committee have before them, I understand, is the first of its kind to be presented to this committee. It is a report on councillors' gifts and hospitalities that they have received over the last year, although this particular report and the appendix does go beyond that because it's been the first of its kind. As members, you all signed up to the Code of Conduct when you were elected, and part of that Code of Conduct does talk about gifts and hospitality and the need for open and transparency. So there is always a presumption on members that when you are offered any gifts and hospitalities that you don't accept them. However, there will be scenarios where that may not be, you may not be in that position. So we have introduced, as I said, as set out in the Code of Conduct, the process that should be followed with regards to any gifts and hospitalities. Within Thurrock, we have agreed that the limit on the gifts and hospitalities is an estimated value of £50, and you have 28 days to actually declare that gift and hospitality. And as monitoring officer, I'm responsible for the register, and the code clearly sets out that that gift and hospitality should be declared to me so I can insert it in the register. This is the first of its kind, so there's obviously been a bit of a learning curve for councillors with regards to completing the gift and hospitality form. The 28 days, if members do lapse within that 28 days, they could be deemed to be actually in breach of the Code of Conduct. What I've also introduced here within Thurrock, within the form that that was already in existence, was a nil return. So that's to ensure that members do actually respond, that they do consider if they've received any gifts and hospitalities and apply their mind to it. So I'm pleased to say we have now received all the gifts and hospitalities for members, and what you will find is on Appendix 1 a list of these gifts and hospitalities. As they start coming in, we will keep a cumulative track of them, and I will consider them as and when they come in. One of the reasons is to ensure that there is not anything untowards happening with, for example, a developer and a councillor, and also so we can see who are which organisations, for example, are approaching members. On page 21 at 3.21, I list the entries, a brief summary. You'll see, because it's the first report, it has gone as far back as 2015. And I don't really know if there's any further you want me to talk about, but Appendix 1 does actually list them. What I will note is there is a former councillor who's now left the authority, but we did, because we had that information, we felt that it's right and proper to include it. But going forward, it will be from basically the financial year that this will be presented here. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much for your report. So, some of this goes back before my time. Have we never had anything before 2015 like this?
As I understand, I wasn't here, I've only been here since February, but I have asked my colleagues and my team, and I've been advised this is the first report of its kind to come to Standards and Audit Committee. I know Matthew is here and may have no otherwise.
I'm not entirely sure. I think there's definitely a record is kept of gifts and hospitality, but I agree with Assi. I don't think a report has been presented to a committee for some years. But I would expect there was some sort of historic record. Whether we've retained those in line with retention policy of documents, I wouldn't be able to answer straight away.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I welcome this report, and I think it should come to this committee every year. I think the nil return as well encourages members to take a look and see if there is anything that they should be reporting as members' gifts and hospitality. We've got a few recommendations. I'm not going to read through them because it's not an urgent item as such. Any members like to make comment or questions? Charles.
Thank you for the report. Is this report going to be put in the public space for public members to review, challenge or make comments on?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Yes, so all these papers that you've received, these are all in the public domain. This meeting, we actually have a councillor who is attending. This meeting is a public meeting. It's open to the members of the public to attend. These papers are published and all online, and anybody can access them. The information provided here is all available to anybody.
Probably I'll rephrase the question. Is there going to be a register that's maintained against every report that's been completed, and that register is subject to review by the public?
Sorry, apologies for not understanding the question. So there is a register that I maintain in my role as monitoring officer. It's that information that I've extracted from that register and I've incorporated it into this report. And that register, I know the register of declarations of interest and the register of interest is available to the public, but I don't think the register of gifts and hospitality is, but I can check that and confirm that with you. But we hold all those forms and then I produce this report. So there should be that open and transparency.
Maybe a recommendation, given the fact that we're trying to be open to the public and transparent, a register for declaration of interest maintained. Gift and hospitality should follow likewise.
I've got a quick question on recommendation 1.3. it says about greater transparency, accountability for gifts and hospitality set out in paragraph 2.7. 2.7. So I was just going to go to Charles because that maybe would have covered off his question, but I can't see a 2.7 on there.
Apologies, Chair. I think that should have been 2.6. I think it's a typo.
No problem. If we all know we're looking. So that I'm just seeing if it covered it off. Any requirement? Does that cover off Charles' question?
No, I think what Charles is asking me is actually to maintain an ongoing register of gifts and hospitalities that could be available to the public to inspect at any time. What I will then do is bring an annual report here, but he wants so we can have that like you would with your register of interest forms. Charles is requesting that I hold something like that as a public document, and I'm happy to look into that, and I can't see a reason why not.
Sort of a living, breathing document that evolves as these different claims are made. So, yeah, Councillor Diard, you have to come in there.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your report. When somebody is given a gift, it's fairly straightforward. As you say, if it's more than £50 or even if it's under £50, you can still report on it. What if there's something a little bit more difficult to assess? Somebody says, OK, well, you'll have to join our club to get this favour or that favour. I'm talking about favours rather than money. So an exchange of, what I say, favours really. Is my first question, but carry on. Sorry.
Through you, Chair. So I'd say that's hospitality. A favour could be deemed as hospitality. I think I'm understanding that as, you join the club and therefore I would say if there is a bit of a pressure on a member to join the club to get what the hospitality is, you should declare that. It should be declared. I work from a very low threshold. My rule of thumb, if in doubt, declare. Just be open and transparent.
Yeah, that wasn't actually a question that I was particularly worried about. It's something I heard of probably 10 years ago, that was not common, but it did happen and I just wondered what sort of action you would take to investigate stuff like that to see if it was happening. Would it be the whistleblowing process?
Through you, Chair, yes, it would be. So if there's a concern, but again, we're surmising here, aren't we? I need to have the information, but if there was a concern that undue pressure or influence was put on a councillor to join an organisation, I don't necessarily see it as whistleblowing, but it is something that I could intervene. But again, it's for the councillor. It depends what the organisation is, and it could be something that you report it to the police. There's lots of scenarios here. I'm sorry, I can't give a conclusive because we are talking about ifs, ands and buts, and I don't know. I'm happy to talk outside if you have concerns. But obviously we do have procedures in the council. We do have a counter-fraud team. We do have whistleblowing. So if there's, as I frequently say, if any member feels undue pressure from anybody outside, report it to the police. They may even have powers. I'm just trying to think what your scenario could be.
Thanks for that. My second one is, what happens when businesses offer huge amounts of money for, let's say, mayoral events or something like that? Is that the same process as we see here?
So for civic duties such as the mayoral civic dinner, for example, that is not a gift and hospitality because that is with regards to the mayor and their role and their function as the first citizen of the council. So it's not uncommon for when you are in the mayoral role, that you will receive various types of gifts and hospitalities, and you may receive funding towards your charity or donations towards a mayoral event. You're receiving that because of your civic duty as the mayor, as the first citizen. So that does not fall under gifts and hospitalities. However, I am aware in the past that mayors do say, I've received throughout the year various gifts and hospitalities. Please see the mayoral register. There might be a register that we hold within the mayor's office. I'm happy to look into that and see if there's something here. But it's not uncommon for a donation, because I think that's more of a donation than a gifts and hospitality when it's to a charitable event or a civic event.
Yeah, I think your idea of a mayoral register of gifts and stuff like that would be worth looking at.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tandy.
Yeah, okay, we're talking about civic and mayors. If it's just a straight, someone gets gifted and they don't declare it and the council get a wind of it, what do you do then?
So if I'm advised that a councillor has received a gift or hospitality and it's over £50 and they haven't declared it, I would obviously undertake some sort of investigation. It could lead to that member breaching the code of conduct, and so that would end up in this committee because standards covers the code of conduct. So I would investigate, discuss with the member and say, why didn't you, have a conversation with them. If it found out that they had intentionally refused because there was some inappropriate relations going on with the person who's giving that gift or hospitality or whatever, you are in breach of the code of conduct. So so the same way, sanctions could be applied to you. We would have it be out in the open that a member had breached the code of conduct. There might even be a hearing as to why you breached that code of conduct. So any breach of a code of conduct does carry some form of sanctions, and we would look to imply those sanctions depending on the severity of that breach.
Any other comments or questions from members? Just to go into the point of the co-opted member made, Charles, is it something we can, well, we can, but maybe add a recommendation that the accountable director will review the situation about putting a live gifts and hospitality register on the council's website? How would members feel about adding that recommendation as a 1.4? Yep. In agreement? Yep. And then the only other changes on 1.3, obviously the paragraph to 2.6 rather than 2.7. That's agreed. Mm-hmm. So if we go through the recommendations, I will read them just to make sure, listening to the BVI report, make sure I do everything correctly. Recommendation 1.1, that the Standards and Audit Committee receive and note the report. Are we agreed? Agreed. To the contrary? No. 1.2, that the Standard and Audit Committee agrees to receive a review of the Gifts and Hospitality Register for councillors on an annual basis. Are we all in agreement? Agreed. To the contrary? No. 1.3, that the Standards and Audit Committee note and comment on the process for greater transparency and accountability for gifts and hospitality set out in paragraph 2.6. Agreed. No to the contrary, thank you. And to add a recommendation of 1.4, that the Standards and Audit Committee note and seek the accountable director to see if a live review of gifts and hospitality would be possible to be published on the council's website. Does everyone agree with that wording in general? Any to the contrary? Thank you very much, members. Item 8, Member Training Schedule 2023/24. This report can be found on page 27 of your agenda. Can I please ask Matthew Bolter to present this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. So there are three main reasons for bringing this report before the committee tonight. The first is to gain your input and comment on the training schedule attached at Appendix A. This training schedule is already being delivered and it represents a reshaped and refreshed schedule since the intervention. The second reason is to simply update you on some of the enhancements that have already taken place on this schedule. So, for example, our leaders, our group leaders and deputy leaders have already been invited to join the LGA's Leadership Academy, which is their flagship residential training course for local authority leaders. And I believe, in fact, one of our senior members is actually attending that as we speak. Likewise, the Centre for Governance Scrutiny has been employed to deliver some training, especially around overview and scrutiny and the intervention. That training is actually taking place tomorrow night from 7 o'clock. And then there's another second training session directed for chairs and vice chairs of scrutiny happening next week. And also, we are close to agreeing with CIPFA, the Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, to train members on the refreshed finance rules that are currently being worked up. So that will come online, as it were, in the next month or so as well. And the third reason for bringing this report is to ask the committee to establish a subcommittee to focus on training, learning and development. And in the report you can see recommendations 1.4 and 1.5 ask you to agree the terms of reference and to make nominations. And I would add that if the committee aren't in a position to actually name councillors tonight to form that subcommittee, I could suggest that the committee agree that I go away with my team and we talk to group leaders to get nominations, and we can notify this committee by email of those nominations should the committee want. And I think really I'd just end with 2 points. Firstly, this report is really about ownership, and we are bringing these reports, training reports, to Standards and Audit now so that you as members can take ownership and actually champion the training that you receive and the wider membership receives. And we'd ask for your support to help us in getting as much engagement as we can across the piece on all our training. And I think the second point to end on is that this report represents really just the first of a suite of reports that we intend to bring to you and your subcommittee on member training. And we hope to bring in the autumn a deeper dive into the analysis of what you as members have been feeding back to us about the quality and shape and content of the training that we've done so far. So I think as months go on and years go on, we'll be able to bring you much more qualitative, detailed reports so that you can make a decision on what's working well, what's not, what needs to be improved, what needs to be introduced. And I shall leave it there and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for your report. I've definitely noticed an increase in training on the calendar, which I think is going to be a good thing. It was obviously mentioned in the BVI report as well, so we've all agreed to sign up for the recommendations there. Councillor Gard.
More of a statement, really. I mean, like yourself, it's been pretty heavy going, really. Yeah, I've attended everyone I've actually been able to. Let's just hope it's reflected in our allowances.
Councillor Collins.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Matthew, in page 29, 3.2, key training sessions have been marked as mandatory in response to member wishes and this committee. Alongside group leaders and whips may be asked to support officers encouraging and promoting attendance to important sessions. My question is, what about clashes? I mean, there's a training, some training going on tomorrow night, but I'm chairing a licensing subcommittee, so I can't attend. Or am I supposed to counsel the licensing subcommittee and attend the training? I mean, which has precedence, please?
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. It's a really good point, Councillor. I think so. The mandatory nature of some of the training that's been introduced has come about because of the Best Value report identifying that members needed to attend certain training every year to refresh and improve their practice and to upskill. I don't think it's any secret that scheduling is really tricky. At the council, I think there's a number of challenges. Firstly, we have a lot of committee meetings. I think pretty much we have a committee meeting every night, except for Fridays. We also have a challenge in that our members prefer evening sessions because a lot of our members still work, so we're sensitive to the fact that daytime sessions doesn't suit all members. So there will be clashes, and we do identify that. I think the way we try to mitigate that so far is to offer mop-up sessions for the key training that we feel that members really must attend. And we've attempted that. I know in ASSI's own Code of Conduct training, we've tried to do that. And likewise with the CFGS tomorrow, although we haven't revealed it yet, that the officer from the CFGS that is providing that training is actually going to physically be on site next week as well to do some other work that they're employed to do with us. And we're already talking about her providing a mop-up session for members that won't be able to attend. And I think that's one of the things we might have to pick out in future reports, because that's something I would really appreciate a steer from as members, because we try and do daytime sessions, afternoon sessions, online sessions, evening sessions, and it's really hard to get a fit for everyone. So it would be really interesting to know in future months whether members prefer certain things online, self-service, as it were, on certain things, so that we can get the fit right. But I think at the moment we have to just accept that there will be clashes, and we'll try and do the mop-up. And I think in answer to your question about licensing, I would absolutely say I think the committee work would take precedence over the training, because we can always fit the training around committees and tailor it to individual councillors.
I'm concerned that people like myself are going to. This is going to be used as a stick to beat you with, because you didn't manage the mandatory training. Well, either I'm at work or I'm in other committees. And if you're sort of really busy with committees, it's going to be inevitable that you're going to fall behind on some of this training. I don't want to be penalised because I'm just doing my job. And I'd like to some sort of precedence or some slack in this, because otherwise I just see this thing turning into a Frankenstein monster if we're not careful.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I think that's a valid point. I think my assurances to you is I wouldn't want to run the member training service as something that is a stick to beat members, because ultimately it's yours. It's not my training, and it has to be useful to you. It has to be accessible to you. If we make it inaccessible to you and then tell you off, as it were, through this committee for not attending, I think that would be remiss of us as officers and the council as a corporation. I think there has to be an element of not enforcement, but understanding where members are avoiding training, and that would have to be addressed. One of the things we would like to introduce is what I refer to as a member training passport, and that's where every member would have an individual training file whereby we could assess your individual training needs. That is something that's going to take some time to develop and some resource to do, but I would hope that that would sidestep your concern, because if you weren't able to attend, say, the ONS training tomorrow, and you couldn't attend the mop-up session because you were working and you had other commitments, that would, I hope, be reflected in your passport, so that when that is reviewed with officers and your group leader, we could identify that issue, that gap, and we could have an honest conversation about, actually, do you need to go to that training? Do you need that training? And it might be that actually you don't need that training because you did something previously, therefore the gap doesn't need to be filled. Or you could be saying, look, I keep missing this, I desperately need it, and then we would respond to you individually, and there might be other, 2 or 3 councillors in the same boat, and we would try and get a session to deliver to those 2 or 3. But I think in the first instance, we have to try a catch-all approach just for efficiency and, trying to get everybody done as much as we can in one time. But if it continues, I would like to think that we could help you resolve that rather than hold it back from you and say you didn't attend and therefore we're going to name and shame you.
I can just see this giant wagging finger at me saying all the bloody time, and which isn't particularly helpful. It's quite demoralising, really. Okay, right. Thank you very much.
I think Councillor Collins raises a valid point. But there was one particular training there were through holidays that were booked, because my wife likes to book things well in advance, like a year ago. I just can't make them, and as much as I'd like to. But I know it's not. As long as we know there's support, that if we can come to someone and maybe do like a small session of 3 or 4 councillors to mop up, I think that would reassure members.
And online if possible.
We'll go to Councillor Tandy next.
Yeah, obviously it's my third year being a councillor, and yeah, there is a big change. I appreciate that. There's more connection, more talking questions. This was a big step. We didn't have that, the graphs. Before would just be the slides. You're sitting there, you're doing your training, half an hour, that's it. There's no notes, no nothing. So, yeah, there is a big change. Well done. And obviously, Jonathan, I've said plenty of times, he's brilliant at his job and really does explain them to all of you as well. So, yeah, there is a big improvement.
The officers, was there a particular question? I don't think there was, so that's what Councillor Collins said. Echo Councillor Tandy's words there.
I would also like to point out that you may have noticed I'm a little bit hard of hearing in particular one particular ear, and I have had training at certain times here in this room where I'm straining to hear. There's been no amplification like we have here tonight. Could we make it as a matter of priority that in future going forward, for those of us who are deaf old gits, could we have some sort of amplification, please? Thank you.
Of course, and apologies that we did not have the infrastructure, so we will definitely prioritise that. But I'm not sure the old and the is applicable.
I describe myself. Thank you.
I'd like to go Charles next, please.
Thank you. I echo Councillor Tandy's words about the increased training. Is there any plan to have a training library of some sort which references, like the training we had today, that one could revisit and reuse for?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Charles. So we've had for many, many years, we have a member zone, which is a resource for members on our Inform system to access certain documents. That has had a limited application in past years, I think mainly because when we've had external providers, they don't always like being recorded, and we set it up pre all this technology. So it's limited, but it's on our plan, and our hope is to actually increase that. And we're actually, me and my team were talking about, there's certain virtual sessions that will be planned in the future. For example, the CFGS training tomorrow. We're also discussing some member training about local area coordinators, which would be virtual, and we can record that on MST on Microsoft Teams. So what we're hoping to do is actually make some of the video training available as well on that resource. So yeah, it's part of the improvement.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you for your question, Charles. I get it's important. A lot of their content is their way of producing an income. It's their copyright almost. So I can see why we can't put it out there for the public domain. But yeah, if somebody, the member zone, I think it's a really good home for that. If we could maybe promote it more alongside these training sessions. Any other member comment? What I'd like, Councillor Raper.
Just adding a comment to that. Former life. We used to have a lot of external people delivering training, and they would sometimes agree to have things online for a month, so that they weren't losing out. But what it meant was, if you couldn't attend the actual session, you had 28 days or so to catch up with it. So I don't know if that's something to be considered. Thank you.
Before I go to the formal recommendation, I just want to see, because obviously I can't speak on behalf of other members sometimes in other areas. So 1.5, to make and agree nominations to subcommittee membership. Are we happy as a committee for that to go away to groups and be discussed? I'd just like to hear people's thoughts and comments.
Sorry, Chair. I think we'd need more resource than we have in our little committee, so we should put that out to everybody. I think in all 49 members.
So I'll look to officers here, but I think the terms of reference for it are it is full council, isn't it? Or effectively the full council of members.
Yeah, so I've actually got the constitution open. So subcommittees, it is the responsibility of the committee creating the subcommittee to appoint the membership. So any membership of the subcommittee doesn't have to go to full council to be agreed. But I think because this is this is the establishment, I think what I would suggest is if you're happy for me to go to group leaders and be independent as a loose affiliation, I can get those nominations and I can circulate them to this committee, and if everyone's in agreement, I can update the committee at the next meeting. We can get the ball rolling on creating the subcommittee.
And members of, it's not if I'm going to go for it officially, but is that generally the agreement with the members?
Better idea, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So we might look to just tweak that recommendation to bring that in line. Is there any other recommendations that any member would like to speak on before we move to the formal? No, can't see anything. Okay, I'll go to the recommendations. 1.1 for the Standards and Audit Committee to review and comment on the members' training standard for 23-24. Everyone in agreement? Any to the contrary? It's unanimous agreement. Recommendation 1.2, the committee agreed to receive quarterly report where necessary on member attendance and feedback at training sessions. Committee agreed?
Agreed.
Any to the contrary? No, unanimously agreed. Recommendation 1.3, establish a subcommittee of the Standards and Audit Committee to oversee and engage with member learning and development. So I think we've agreed to establish one. Agreed, yeah. To the contrary? No, unanimously agreed. And then on 1.5, I think maybe just to tweak this recommendation slightly, to make and agree nominations to the subcommittee membership, working with the accountable director, accountable officer in democratic services to work with parties outside of this meeting.
Will that do?
Yeah, I could, if I may, Chair, you could maybe make a suggestion that committee agree to delegate responsibility for democratic services to liaise with group leaders to obtain nominations.
And that's why you're in democratic services. So, members, as Matthew, on that agreement for 1.5, are we in agreement?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Any to the contrary? Unanimous agreement. Thank you, members and committee. Moving on to item 9, complaints received under the Members' Code of Conduct. Can I please ask Asmat Hussain to present this report?
Thank you, Chair. So before committee this evening, you do have a report with regards to the complaints that have been received by myself as MO and my predecessors for the municipal year of 2022-23. I've set out on the table on the next page. Sorry, my report is not numbered. I do apologise, but from 2.4 onwards, you will see there is a table set out with all the different allegations that we have received, that I have received with regards to the Code of Conduct. There's a total of 10. This is the most up-to-date report. And there is a variety of the nature of the complaints that we that are coming in to me as MO. They range from disclosure of confidential information, allegation of harassment, derogatory and racist marks on comments on Facebook, and there's also one on false claims made about the complainant. As you can see, some of these are closed and some of these are still ongoing and open, and there's communications happening and consultation and engagement with the independent persons with regards to the next steps. So the report is very restricted because obviously it has personal data and it involves members' names and also may involve external people's information. So what you have here is a very high-level report. What I do with this type of report is to look for if there's any particular theme that I need to focus on. For example, in the member learning development, if there's a high level of, for example, comments made on social media, I would then look to do some more training with members so they understand how to use social media. Or if there's more concerns about bullying and harassment, maybe looking at how I can, address that with members and officers, so forth. So really, it's a noting report, and if you want more detailed information, we would have to go into exempt would have to go into an exempt item in the report in the meeting.
Thank you very much for your report. So, yeah, this is note the outcomes of this report. I've got one question, and hopefully you can answer without us having to go into exempt. But when someone potentially the date the paper was received, and then the status of it is because they're no longer an elected member, how long? I suppose my question is, how long does the average investigation take?
Very good question, Chair. So there is set procedures set out in the Constitution, and I think it's about 30 days. I have to say, unfortunately, due to high turnover in my role, due to priorities and resource implication, there has been a delay in responding to some of these complaints and actually undertaking the investigation. It is something I'm looking at to strengthen. I have a new person joining on Monday as the head of legal, who will also assist because there is no head of legal within Thurrock. It's straight to my role. So I'm looking at bringing in additional resources to help process these complaints a lot more efficiently and expeditiously. But there is a process set out. One of the things I would like to do under the work plan, which is your next item, is look at the complaints procedure and bring that to this committee so we can ensure it's, it is smarter. The detailed reporting I have that is confidential does give some of that information out about the time that the complaint was received, the time we responded, etc. So not able to provide some of that in this meeting, but happy to do it in an exempt or in another meeting, happy to provide exempt information that will show you some of the delays are from officers, and I'm not going to refute that, but there is also sometimes delay from the members not responding, and to the point where we're constantly chasing, and as MO I sometimes even ask the whip to get involved because we're not getting no responses.
I appreciate the answer. It was just you predicted my next question about maybe getting this back in the work programme to look at it so we can keep up to date with it as we go through. Any member wish to comment on? Councillor Rigby and then Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your report. You say that a lot of the information is confidential. Are the members' names available to other members, or is that is not?
Through you, Chair. When you say so if a complaint is about a member to member, that member to member, they're told who the complainant is and the contents of the complaint, and it's sometimes even shared the actual complaint itself, so that we are, it's only natural justice, isn't it, that you know who the individual is complaint about, who's made the complaint about you. So that is available to the individual. On a spreadsheet I have all that high level detail.
Are we allowed to know who these, because some of these are sort of racism and things that are quite serious, potentially serious allegations. Will that member that's been accused of these allegations, will that name ever be released, or is that always going to be kept
So the practice here in Thurrock, and I'm happy to review that practice, is that I'm following your current practice, and that is this table. In other authorities, I provide more information as to which the councillor is. I'm happy to look and think and have a discussion with yourselves about what good looks like in reporting complaints, and but at the same time, we can't predetermine that person has actually has actually been founded, if that makes sense, because there's other commentary. But I'm happy that I'm just following this precedent. But again, in other authorities, I've actually been more explicit about which councillor it is has been complained about and has behaved inappropriately or has had their case closed. So I'm happy to bring a further consideration here.
Thank you. And will the members involved, will they receive sort of training in that area? Because in the workplace, if you have a sort of bullying, accusation, you will then be sent on a training course to try and, teach you how not to bully. Is that a similar thing for members, or is it not in that case?
Through you, Chair. So yes. So if the complaint is founded, if it is found that somebody has been bullying or harassment, or if it's been upheld that there has been racist comments, you can deal with the matter informally by way of an apology. But what would normally happen is you receive the apology, and my practice has always been, I think you should go on diversity training or some other form of training, and I can add that as part of the MO's decision to close the case and say, accept your apology informally, but we think on top of that you need to do X, Y and Z. So I have, whilst I've been here, have agreed to accept the apology and say to the individual member, I think this is a reasonable, proportionate apology, but what we've done is we've also asked them to do X, Y and Z training. So it adds that assurance that as the person who's put the complaint in, yes, okay, it's been upheld, but I've got that assurance as well that they are being trained to not to do these sort of things again. Part of the sanctions, if it's upheld and it has a hearing, you can also stipulate that. So it might be useful for us actually as a committee to actually look at some of the sanctions that are available, because obviously under the Localism Act it removed a lot of the sanctions that MOs had the power to do. So again, it could be a piece of work we can look at together in Audit Committee.
Thank you.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you. Just out of interest, I'm not asking for names or anything like that, but there's the last one. False claims made about the complainant. Complainant has failed to provide further information requested by the monitoring officer. So that's somebody's. Am I reading this right? Somebody's made a claim against someone but couldn't evidence it. Is that right? So what then happens to that person who made a false claim? Is that then treated as a complaint?
It just falls. So so in that scenario, an individual made a complaint, further information was requested, there was nothing to substantiate that claim, the claimant is closed and it falls, basically. You do not then pursue the person making the complaint. If it's the same individual making the complaint again and again and again and again, that can be deemed as vexatious. But in this scenario, it's just one complaint.
That was one of my concerns. I mean, how many goes do they have a go at making a false complaint before it becomes vexatious or classed as vexatious?
Through you, Chair, I'm not aware of the Council's vexatious policy. Most local authorities have what we call a vexatious policy. Again, it would be a reasonable test, and I think that's something that we could, again, what is reasonable, 2, 3, 4, 5, but the rules of natural justice in each case has to be considered on its own merits, and what I'd need to do, if it's the same person time and time again, then yes, I would not make that decision on my own. I would engage the independent persons. And the independent person, we have two, and I'm not talking yourselves as co-opted members, we have two independent people that I actually, and my Deputy Monitoring Officer, we do consult and discuss and engage. So I wouldn't trigger that on my own without a further discussion with them, and also looking at the Council's vexatious policy.
Finally, there was one particular thing. Sometimes, as councillors, we're asked to sit in on disciplinary hearings for members of staff and officers for. Yeah.
I'm just asking if you do that.
Yeah. We have to take training for it first. Would we be getting a similar table like this for such hearings?
Through you, Chair. So I have in previous Standards Committee, I hope we never get to that position where we have to have a hearing, but I am more than happy to provide training on how to run a hearing under the complaints process, and there are various providers out there that actually come in and provide really good training and will actually give you a mini exercise and pretend hearing of a member complaining. So I'm happy to look at that and for us to consider that type of training.
But would we have a similar list shown to this about complaints and outcomes and stuff like that?
Oh, sorry, I do apologise. I've just had to. Sorry, I did not hear you. Sorry for you, Chair. So I'm not. I don't know. I don't think we do have, and that would be that data that we would hold if we had something similar to that for staff would be. You know, we've got to be very careful with GDPR. I don't know if there's a generic one, but that again, that's something that I could look at and give an update to the committee. But what I would say is to focus the committee. I'd like to stick with standards, but again, as part of any internal audit we do in HR policies and procedures, that could be picked up through an internal audit process as to being brought to a separate item to this committee on that issue.
Okay, thank you. I only wanted something generic anyway. Thank you.
Just in your experience, how are we doing if it's 10 in this time frame? Is that average, high, low?
It's a good question, Chair. So my experience has mainly been London, so there's a nuance around that, and the number of members you have, the size of your organisation, the political split. There's loads of different factors. This, to me, looks slightly on the high side, but I think there's a lot of work being undertaken. For example, the mandatory code of conduct training, and I know how people feel about it being mandatory. But there's that awareness as well around gifts and hospices. So I think as we start moving into introducing more awareness around the code of conduct, these will start, and people are being trained on how to use social media, you know, more awareness around member officer protocols, etc. These will reduce. But to me, it looks slightly high because this is from November 22 until, but again, I'm happy to do a benchmark with the Essex area to see how many complaints other standards committees have and bring that to you. But
thank you. As it's so redacted in terms of the actual information, I think the number that's 10 is something that's tangible that we can use to benchmark ourselves. So that might be a useful thing for you to bring back to us in the future. Any other? Councillor Raper.
Thank you. Just sort of going on from some of the things you were saying earlier about lots of stuff has to remain confidential. I don't think there would be a problem with you including in this the length of time it got to resolve them. So I think that would be quite useful for us as a committee to see. Thank you.
I think that was accepted. Just.
Sorry, yes, Chair, agreed. Happy to agree that.
Thank you. Any other comments from any other members? No. So the recommendation set out on the front page of the report. 1.1, that the committee note the outcomes on complaints received under the members' code of conduct. Are we all in agreement? Agreed. Into the contrary? Unanimous agreement. Thank you. Moving on to the final agenda item, item 10, the work programme, found on page 45. Does any members wish to comment on the work programme? Councillor Lydiard.
Thank you, Chair. Just one item I'd like to see added to our work programme is that if the monitoring officer can bring to committee members' attendance at committee meetings. Sorry.
Just to expand on that, Councillor Lydiard, you're seeking like a report on terms of attendance, in terms of statistics and averages, or?
Yeah, I mean there are some statistics already, aren't there, on the website, and whether they are comprehensive enough or accurate, we'll rely on yourselves to let us know.
just before I hand it over to officers, I think it's a good point that he's raised, because I've tried before to work out mine, and I've had to use like multiple Excel spreadsheets to pull different numbers from different areas. I feel so. Yeah, if you could, I'd take that over to whichever officer wants to pick up on that, please.
Yeah, if I may, thank you. Yeah, that's doable. I'm pretty sure the ModGov system will provide us with percentages fairly easy. I wonder whether it would be useful for this committee, whether you'd want that provided as a briefing note initially, because then you can just see the raw data, and then that may help you inform what you might want to see in a report. It's up to you. We can provide a report, but I'm just thinking if it's simply just presenting figures, we could provide that fairly quickly in a briefing note to you all outside the meeting not straight away, but you know, within a couple of weeks, and you could shape it that way.
How do members feel about receiving that as a briefing note and then maybe expanding it once we've seen the raw data? Councillor Lydiard?
I think part of the exercise is to let everybody know, all 49 councillors, who attends what meetings and at what sort of frequency, and it might encourage more members to attend 100%.
So who? Councillor Tandy.
Yeah, I'm exactly one example today. I'm supposed to be at two places. One is obviously here and one was over there. So obviously I've sat here because we're doing the training at 6 o'clock. So the only issue I have now is obviously with my attendance record, it's going to say I didn't attend over there and I attended here. So how can I resolve that?
I think the councillor raises a valid point there.
I think it goes back to Councillor Collins's point in that we always, as democratic services, always try and avoid having two meetings on the same night. We don't want to do it as a service. We feel that it divides not only members, but it actually calls the resources. My team we're 4 people at the moment, and 3 of us are actually in the office tonight doing meetings, so we try and avoid it. I think that's our challenge when certain committees request extraordinary meetings. We only have a limited parameters in which to fill those meetings. So I think that is something that is a challenge that we find hard to avoid when we have to hold extraordinary meetings. I think there might be a way in the report. There might be a way that we can note that, Councillor, and we'll see if we can, because if you're giving your apologies to another committee, that should be registered in the minutes, and the clerk to that meeting should have access to that information. So we should be able to reflect that in the report. But if not, that could be a worthy thing to raise as a Standards and Audit Committee and say, actually, having 2 meetings on the same night doesn't aid all members in fulfilling their duties, and perhaps there needs to be a protocol or a policy to avoid that.
Okay, that's fine, but my attendance record, I mean, I've got 100%. I don't want that affected, so what can I do?
Yeah, I agree, Councillor. I don't think there is much you can do. You can only attend one meeting at a time. I think the only thing from a transparency perspective is that obviously you can ask for it to be noted in your apologies to Health ONS tonight that you've had to attend Standards and Audit instead, and therefore you've been unable to attend HOSC, and you ask that to be reflected in the minutes, so that if you get challenged on that or you wish to use the public record, you can point to that to say, look, I had a legitimate reason to not be there.
Just before we go to Councillor Abe, if we wanted to actually, at the moment we've got apologies received and things like that, if we actually wanted to add to that and say sort of engaged on other council business as an extra section where you could assign yourself, how difficult would that be?
So there's 2 aspects to that. In the non-IT world, that's fine, because all our clerks are human beings and they can add that to the record and they can add that to the minutes. That's not a problem. ModGov, when you register your apologies, we have a drop-down menu where we pick a number of categories. I'm not aware that there is a category on there that's other council business or something. But I can look into that, and we can talk to the ModGov people to see if that is an option that we can do.
You never know. This could be might have stumbled on something that the whole of the UK is seeking on ModGov, so you can take that. But Councillor Collins.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very valid point that Councillor Townley's made, and it's also a thing that's concerned me. No matter how hard you work, you're not going to look virtuous if you miss one or two meetings because you've been double booked, and suddenly you're a villain. So, yeah, I think some sort of way of reporting that you couldn't attend because you were on other council business would be really important. Thank you.
Any other, Councillor Raper?
You've already asked my question, but couldn't we just have a code that indicates the reason you weren't there, so that when we just look at numbers, it's not purely you were there or you weren't. We have some sort of indication. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other? Over to Charles.
I probably note from the BDO audit that there's a September revised audit plan coming in. Is that going to feature in the November meeting or September meeting?
What I'd suggest, Councillor, is obviously, as I said, we need to monitor the progress. I think you definitely need a regular standing item from external audit. It may include the plan next time if that's ready. So I suggest we put the regular item on of an update from them, and then we can be a bit flexible about what comes to which meeting. Obviously, they've committed to try and bring that to the next one, so that would be the aim. But nearer the time, we'll get clarification on whether they're ready to do so. And then, if they are, we've got the item as well, Chair, if that works, in terms of having a progress update. And then that could become an audit plan update, if ready.
I think that would be warmly sort of agreed by the committee. Yeah, if we can bring that, that'd be great. Councillor Rigby? Oh, sorry, Charles.
Given the fact that we've also, coming back to Gary's point, given the fact that we've got a better complement of staffing in the IT and in the internal audit function, is it something that can be done pretty much earlier than the September, November Internal Audit Charter 22 review, given the fact that we haven't had an internal audit review for a while? This has been the first one, and we've got an IT audit that has been pending for a while. So IT, disaster recovery, all of these other stuff coming in.
I can try and see what we can do with our colleagues at Mazars to pull it forward so that we can get an IT audit done. There are a couple of items actually that need to be included for the internal audit progress report, and we're also going to bring a paper to Standards and Audit Committee on the public sector internal audit standards self-assessment that we're going to be going through, or that we are going through. So we'll have those two papers to bring to September.
Councillor Lydiard, then Councillor Rigby.
Thanks, Chair. Slightly changing the subject. Artificial intelligence. I mean, we've all, heard all sorts of stuff, and I've been sort of thinking, well, how would that affect Thurrock Council? And there's, of course, reputational, possibly reduced staffing, whole range of things, but certainly worth looking at. Whether it's our responsibility or another committee, I'm not really sure.
Through you, Chair. So the council, as my understanding, does have some AI, but I think it's done more through. Actually, does it have chat box? Actually, sorry, I've just realised. Maybe it doesn't. But AI tends to be used within local authorities in the customer's call centre. They tend to use AI and chat box. Actually, I'm now realising maybe Thurrock hasn't got chat box, but Jonathan has been here longer than myself, so may be able to answer that.
So I think there's some processes run, and I think we saw it at the panel, Lassie. So what we've actually, it's come to panel because there's a renewal of a contract that uses, I think they said, 34 robotic processes. We've actually asked for the detail of that, so we just understand in a bit more detail how those processes are operating. It's certainly something that will never, inevitably expand, and I think, as it's right, customer services is an obvious place where that could happen. I certainly think it's one to keep an eye on, and there's obviously, if you as members want a regular update, whether it's through this committee or another forum, I think we'd have to explore a bit more with our IT colleagues to give you the detail, but we certainly could give you the detail of how we use some of those robotic processes to date, and whether that expands more broadly into those AI kind of chatbots that we're all reading about at the moment. But there's certainly opportunities there, and as Ashley says, are already in place at other authorities.
Councillor Rigby, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So if I can move back a bit to BDO, it might be a question more for Jonathan or perhaps Gary. The delay in the audit, it's now a few years old, has that had an impact on recent events, really, and what's happened with the council? Could things have maybe been stopped or intervened earlier if the audit had been done on time?
So it's a good question. And obviously the audit we've got open is the 2021 audit, which will, as I said earlier, will go back and include 1920. The audit will obviously be based on the information provided to them. One of the issues we've had at the council is that the full extent of the situation that was faced only became apparent broadly this time last year. Obviously, therefore, whether it's internally or externally, we're all responding to the same level of information. And obviously, as soon as that information has become available, auditors and all other bodies, notably through the intervention process internally, have to then respond to what's happened and adjust strategies, which is what Rachel took us through earlier. They're making that reassessment and reassessing their audit plan in response to that. Obviously, the BVI report commented more broadly on the audit. It didn't actually, again, particularly, suggest that audit should pick it up, because there are various sources of information to pick it up from. And obviously, as I say, that information started, was revealed to the council this time last year, but preceding that, there was limited, there started to be a flow of evidence to suggest that, but obviously it was only clarified at certain points in time. And actually, if you take the solar investment, for example, the actual clarification of loss only actually came in October last year, because that's the point at which we had an external valuation of the asset that confirmed it wasn't worth what our investment had been. So it's quite a difficult one to, say with certainty. There's no doubt, the audit will look at the details provided contractually. So if you took, again, the solar investment, for example, you would contractually see a set of figures that broadly are reflected in those contracts. Actually, the issue then thereafter is those contracts are not reflecting the value we now know. So the external audit will come back and report on their findings in due course. They will adjust the values, obviously, accordingly. What I would say broadly on external audit as well is it's a backward look, so it's not a forward look. So obviously our wider governance processes are as important in the mix of this, and actually reading the BVI report, it's actually about the governance predominantly and the governance issues at the council. So there's the whole governance framework, and obviously one of our boards that ASSI leads is the Governance Review Board, and that is directly aimed at fixing the wider issues identified by both the BVI and the intervention. So it's more complicated than that, and obviously the auditors can only respond to the level of evidence put before them. They can then make inquiries, so they're not, they've got to be happy with their own processes internally as well. But to date, there's nothing. Certainly from our perspective, the information came to us this time last year. That clarified the scale of the issue. But as I say, the main factor in that is the solar investment, and the main source of evidence to confirm that came in October last year. So.
Councillor Collins,
Sorry, Chair, just to
regarding the work programme.
There is something that's been a bee in my bonnet for some time. I did mention it at the last one, is that there was actually oversight of the contracts. The point being, we're supposed to look at what the council's doing, and as part of our oversight, we should at least know what's in the contracts that are being set up. If we had sight of these contracts before, we would have picked up an awful lot of things that were probably wrong. Yet, and we've also had other things, projects that we would have really profited from if we'd seen the contracts. Is there anything we can do to get sight of these contracts and reassure ourselves that they are fit for purpose going forward, please?
So I'll keep it really short because my colleagues from it's actually the work plan item. But so the issues we've identified are not specific to the contracts themselves. What the evidence then points to is that there's not enough support within the contract subsequently to support the value in the example I gave of the solar asset. So broadly, the issue we've got is the security underpinning the bond investment is not sufficient to redeem the funds from the investment. Now, broadly, without going into any further detail in this forum publicly, but obviously that's under assessment and part of ongoing. But what I would say, it's not quite as straightforward as it was blatantly obvious something was or wasn't in a contract. It's taking a long-term legal assessment of that contract. Would you as members or us, in my role as an officer in that regard, be an expert in that contract? No. You rely on advisors at the time to provide you with the reassurance, due diligence, support to give you a clear view that you are, as a council, signing up to a contract that is in line with what you believe it to be. And that, obviously, as part of the ongoing work, most of the focus, for example, on the solar assets has been understanding the documentation that underpins every one of those bonds. I certainly, it's a legal expertise area. It's not necessarily an area for us as officers, you as members. It would require legal experts and does require legal experts to make that assessment. And actually one of the pieces of work to sell the investment ultimately is actually about ensuring that the new security is, once following reassessment, is put in place or is assessed appropriately so that the council recovers the funds appropriately at the sales point. That work sits with the administrators. They've largely completed that piece of work. So we now know clearly where all the security the council has lies, and that enables them ultimately to make a clean sale of the asset. So that's the process they go through in the background. At the point of investment, as I say, it should have been that we had similar legal advice to be reassured over security. It's clear, consequently, there were some issues in that, and I would say again that's partly, not at the any issue at the council end specifically. There's things that have happened with the companies themselves that we are also investigating. So it's a very, particularly with the solar investment, it's a very complex issue from start to finish, and it's even more complex when you're talking about we had a series of bonds, they were then replaced with another series of bonds. All of those bonds and the transition between them are being assessed. So it's, it's certainly not, if you'd seen the contract, Councillor Collins, I don't think that, we would have been able to make any reasonable assessment of that issue that was there at the time.
May I interject? I'm just a bit nervous that we're going off track, that the purpose now is to talk about what we can look at in the work programme going forward, Chair. And I just feel that Jonathan's having to explain a bit more about investment and divestment, and maybe we could add something in the work plan that enables this Q&A session of Jonathan as a Section 151 in this committee. I'm just conscious that the agenda is looking at that work plan, so happy to look at maybe work with Jonathan and bring a follow-up item for a future meeting on this subject, this topic around contract management and what happened, etc. If that helps.
Actually, what I was after was a lot simpler than that. It was just that if we got contracts coming through, couldn't we have the person who's in charge of the contracts, and we say that, have we got provisions in for if they go bust, we're not exploiting it, and just ask the question. We don't have to know the ins and outs of how or the legalese. It's just like, yes, it's in. It's at clause 2.5 on page 73. That's all.
So, Chair, what I'll put on the work programme is Gary and his team and/or Mazars will undertake a random sampling of the contracts we have in place within the council to ensure that we have robust clauses with regards to what you're describing. May I take this opportunity to add some other items on the work plan that I think that the committee may want to look at? So, looking at this work programme, I've tried to include some stuff around standards, but I think the work plan also, as a standing item, there will always be the internal audit progress reports. We'll just need to make sure that's at every single committee. I'm keen that the internal audit also have the self-assessment back here and have a discussion on that self-assessment, and also the code of corporate governance should be brought to this committee so we can basically read and acknowledge what the code of corporate governance for this council is, because I don't know if that's ever been here before. I'm also keen that to come to this audit committee we have a suite of documents around the counter fraud strategy, things around so I think the council is going to be developing a fraud charter, and I think it'd be good for this committee to look at the money laundering, the anti-money laundering policies, the whistleblowing policy, and corruption and bribery policy. I think it's all part of the suite of documents around the fraud charter. And I know we have some comments about the counter fraud and investigation quarterly updates, but I just think it's good for this committee to look at what policies sit behind that and have that information here as well. And then the other item I want to add to the work plan is that there is a private meeting of this audit committee without officers with the external auditors, and that takes place maybe half an hour before the committee meets, so you can have a Q&A session and discussion openly and openly with them without any officers in attendance. So I'd like to include that in the work plan as well. Thank you, Chair.
I'm happy to support those going to the work programme. Councillor Lydiard?
Just a quickie. The procurement law 2024 is changing, I understand, and that makes quite an impact on local government. So can you have a think about that?
So again, I'm happy to look at that, but I'm not sure if it's a function of the audit committee, and I'm just trying to keep the audit committee on track to audit matters. But if you would like a note on the procurement laws that change and the laws changing around subsidy, I'm more than happy to share that with you.
Anything else on the work programme in particular? Just one thing I'm going to minuted. The A13 widening project, Stanford Oak transport projects are huge projects in the public domain and in the public interest. So I will speak to the accountable directors before the next calendar meeting and try and get an ETA when those reports will be coming to this committee, if that's in agreement with the rest of the members.
Absolutely.
And with that, the time is 21:18. This concludes the business of the meeting this evening. I now declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Sure.